So come sitting number 25, and I spoke through the trumpet and told us that they were trying to get materialization, ectoplasmic materialization. Now, I won't explain what ectoplasm is at the moment, because I'll explain it when I come to the actual slide. It's a material, it's a solid material, ectoplasm. That's the first thing. It's not ghostly, it's not airy-fairy, it's a solid material. It is vibrant. It is a material between the spirit world and the physical world, which links the two, but it is solid, and they can do anything with it. They can make it any way they want it. Okay? So Andy Agg said they were experimenting, and we saw in front of the plaque, we painted a plaque, we saw fingers first, then we saw a hand, then we saw two hands, different sized hands, and the plaque was moved round by the spirit people, not by us, moved round the room so that we could all see the hands, and then we were allowed to touch them. You ask if you can, of course, you know that. You don't do anything without asking permission from the spirit people. You work in cooperation. You give, they give, the same thing. We all then receive. Passed around, and then we touch them. Just like our own hands. Flesh-like, warm, just the same. So we saw hands. Then, sitting number 32, in particular. And I always say this was the one that was out of this world. Well, certainly to me. We're sitting round. By now we'd asked, could we have a red light? We always wanted, we were not naive, we were not gullible. We wanted to know that what happened was actually true. What happened and was spirit, not anything else. So we said, would it be possible to have a red light for the materialization? We got permission to have a red light. And I have here, believe it or not, 50 years later, the actual red light. The same piece of glass with which we took some of these photographs you'll see. And inside is the actual bulb, which still works 50 years later. So we had the red light. So here we are sitting in the room. My mother, I'm sitting here, my mother's there, 1, 2, 3 strides away, no more, under the fireplace, the other people sitting round, red light on, we're just sitting quietly, we'd sang our songs, bright and cheerful songs, sitting quietly, and we all started saying, what's that? Look, in the middle of the room there. We saw this whiteness. Well, say whiteness in a red light, but it was a type of whiteness building up. We said, oh, looks like ectoplasm, doesn't it? Yeah, we saw this build up. My mother's still sitting there. Don't forget, she's not in the cabin room, she's sitting there. It's built up. As it built up, we said, oh yes, look. As I'm looking at it, I'm saying it because it wasn't anything then, it turned. And I could see there was a face. And then, as it turned towards me, 2 hands and arms came out towards me. And I'm sitting there a bit apprehensive. I wasn't frightened, because I'd been to Helen Duncan's. I'd sat in Helen Duncan's circle before the war. These 2 arms came out and took hold of mine. I put mine out, took hold of mine, and put into my hand were 4 carnations. Now they were apples. And Agg, who the lady was standing there, had brought me 4 carnations. She said, for you, for you. Turned and went. And I'm sitting there. I can feel it now. I was holding those carnations so tightly in that hand. No need to, because they wouldn't disappear. They were in apples. they'd have stayed. I could have laid them on the floor, but no way. I think in today's phrase, the word is gobsmacked, isn't it? And Dad, who had passed over 4 years ago, stood there, giving me 4 carnations. Wonderful. That was our first full materialization. We were then told that we could have guests, people like yourselves. We had, a couple of hundred people over the time. And we said, right. And I said to Sid, what about Mr. Jones? We know he's interested. Never mind how we found out, but we found out he was interested, which through Doris as a nurse, actually. He said, yes, ask him. And told him we had this circle, we had materialization, would he like to come? Oh, when? Tonight? No, not tonight, Mr. Jones. Next Saturday. Right. He was there in Saturday. Now, you've got a surgeon, a medical man, highly respectable and well, respected throughout the Northeast. Not a man given to, God bless you friends, that'll do, you know this thing I'm talking about, none of that. We were investigative people, loved and harmony, but we didn't accept naive. Neither did he. So that night when Dad came, she built him. Stood there. Talked away. Stood there talking to us. And then she told us a few words with Mr. Jones, and she said, perhaps Mr. Jones could come again sometime. We said, yes, lovely. But Mr. Jones either didn't or didn't want to hear the word sometime. It wasn't the next Saturday, but the following Saturday, the doorbell rang just before we started, opened the door, it's Mr. Jones. Good evening, and in he steps. Well, we couldn't say, no, you weren't supposed to come in. But you see, he had to come, he became part of it. And through his knowledge of infrared photography, we were able to take some infrared photographs, which you will see tonight. 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Very different equipment from before, but I'll show you that later. But it was through having Mr. Jones there. So nothing happens by accident, does it? He had to join us, he became part of the circle. And I built, he saw her, had a few words. When we finished, he said, as we were having our cup of tea, he said, you know, there's one thing I would have liked. We said, yes, Mr. Jones. He said, I would have liked to have felt Mrs. Abbott's pulse. And why not? We never thought about it. But there's the medical brain, you see. I'd like to feel her pulse. Well, we'll ask next week, Mr. Jones. Certainly, it's possible. Right. Next week came, sitting there, and I built. Before a word was said, she said, good evening, right back. She just turned to Mr. Jones, 2 strides away, and said, Mr. Jones? Yes, Mrs. Abbott. They were always very polite to each other. It was Aunt Ag and Pop, but to them, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Abbott. Yes. I understand you would like to take my pulse. Here's Aunt Ag, ectoplasmic materialized person, standing there saying to Mr. Jones, before I understand you'd like to take my pulse. Yes, Mrs. Abbott, I would. Of course, she'd been listening, hadn't she, last week, while we're having our cup of tea. We heard him say it, so we didn't have to ask. Right. So she said, all right. She just held out her arm, lifted the robe, which you'll see on the photograph, I'll explain that later. Lifted the robe, he stood up, put his fingers on, in the correct way, in the true way, just stood up and stood there. About half a minute. He did absolutely properly, as I call it. Thank you, Mrs. Abbott. You live. In other words, the pulse was there. The strong pulse was there. She said, thank you, Mr. Jones. I am living, and I will continue to live. Isn't that wonderful? A materialized person standing there, saying to Mr. Jones, yes, Mr. Jones, I am living and I will continue. And of course she is, as they all are.